What if the job you applied for was never meant to hire you, but to finish what they started years ago? Jason Miller thought he found a simple night shift at a storage facility. Easy money, quiet hours. But inside Black Pine, survival comes with one condition: follow the rules or face something far worse. As strange knocks, impossible voices, and shifting realities unfold, Jason discovers this isn't his first time here. The past he forgot is the key to a ritual that never stopped. And now, the vessel awaits completion. This is The Rules of Black Pine, a horror story where breaking one rule might cost you everything. The scratching started again. It was a faint, deliberate rasping sound, like fingernails running slowly along glass. I sat still on my old leather couch, my dog Max tensing beside me, ears perked, his low growl barely audible. The television hummed in the corner of the room, casting flickering shadows across the faded carpet. Outside the apartment window, the moon hovered unnaturally large above the pines that bordered Black Pine Hollow. The scraping continued, rhythmic and unsettling, coming from the window itself. 3 stories up. I forced myself not to react. Maybe it was just the wind, or a loose branch. But the timing, always around midnight, was starting to feel deliberate. I reached down and scratched Max behind the ear, trying to calm both of us, but my hand was shaking. The job ad had appeared that morning, tucked inside the classifieds of the local newspaper. A thin, greasy pamphlet I almost tossed into the trash. But something about that bold headline caught my eye. Night shift warehouse attendant, $28.00/hour, no experience necessary. Immediate hiring, $28 an hour. It sounded unreal, especially for someone like me. 31, unemployed for months, bills stacking up like dead leaves in autumn. I was running out of options. My severance pay from the distribution center had dried up long ago, and even Max's food was getting cheap. The job description was vague, just a single line. Overnight inventory monitoring. Must be able to follow instructions exactly. Desperation has a way of making the improbable look appealing. By noon, I was on the phone. Black Pine Storage Facility, this is Jack speaking. How can I help you? The voice answered cheerfully, as though rehearsed. Yes, hi. I'm calling about the night shift position you posted. Perfect timing. We're still hiring. Can you come by for a quick interview this afternoon? Nothing formal, just a chat. We prefer candidates who can start right away. His words were smooth, efficient. I glanced at the clock. 9:43 a.m., plenty of time. Sure, 4 o'clock work for you? I asked, trying to match his enthusiasm. Perfect. We'll see you at 4 p.m. sharp. The line went dead. For the rest of the day, I tried to distract myself, bouncing between TV channels, sipping cheap coffee, half listening to the same infomercial loops. But the anxiety kept returning, like a whisper in the back of my mind, the scratching. The way Max wouldn't stop staring at the window lately, and now this strange, too-good-to-be-true job offer. At 3:15, I forced myself up, showered, and dressed carefully. Light checkered shirt, khaki slacks, freshly shaven. I checked myself in the mirror, pausing for a moment. My reflection stared back, gaunt and tired, darker circles under my eyes than I remembered. The warehouse was further out than I expected, nearly 20 minutes into the outskirts, where the paved streets dissolved into gravel. The sun dipped low as I arrived, casting long shadows across the facility's weathered sign. Black Pine Storage, personal only. A few semi-trucks sat idle in the lot, their massive frames eerily still, as if abandoned mid-delivery. I parked my rusted sedan near the front office. The building was small but solid. Steel siding, security cameras mounted like watchful eyes. I ran a nervous hand through my hair before stepping inside. The cool blast of air conditioning struck me immediately, a sharp contrast to the muggy New Mexico summer. A tall man in his late 40s approached from behind the front desk, extending his hand. He wore an off-the-rack gray suit that looked oddly out of place in this industrial setting. Jason Miller, right? I'm Jack. Welcome. Thanks for having me, I replied, Trying to steady my voice as we shook hands, Jack led me into a small adjoining office. The blinds were drawn shut and a single desk lamp lit the room with an amber glow. On the desk sat a manila folder, thick with paperwork. "Let's go through a few basics," Jack began, flipping open the folder. His tone shifted suddenly, still polite but more mechanical now. "How far do you live from the facility? Can you work overtime if needed? Any issues with your eyesight or memory?" The questions were oddly specific, but I answered them truthfully. My heart rate spiked as I noticed he wasn't writing anything down. Finally, Jack closed the folder with a satisfying snap. "You're hired." "Just like that? Just like that." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll start tonight, 12:30 a.m. sharp. Here," he handed me a thick packet of documents. "This contains everything you'll need. Most of it's routine, safety protocols, equipment guidelines. But pay close attention to the last section. It's titled Survival Rules. It's very important you follow those rules exactly." The way he emphasized survival made my stomach knot. Was this some elaborate hazing ritual? A sick joke? Jack didn't elaborate. Instead, he rose and gestured toward the exit. "We'll see tonight. Don't be late." The drive home felt longer than before. As the sun vanished behind the hills, the world seemed to dim with it. My fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel the entire way back. Once inside my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table, lit a single lamp, and carefully opened the pack. At first, the contents were standard corporate fluff: emergency exits, safety drills, chain of command flowcharts. But tucked near the back was a thin, separate booklet. Its cover was stamped in faded ink. Survival Rules, Level 1 Night Shift. The introduction was brief and unsettling. "Failure to follow these rules may result in severe consequences. Do not attempt to question or alter the instructions. Do not attempt to understand the rationale behind them." The first rule made my blood chill. Rule 1. When entering the parking lot, 2 vehicles will follow you from the main gate to the loading dock. Do not acknowledge them. Do not look back. If you turn and see someone exit the vehicle on the right, run immediately to the office and lock the door. Call the emergency number listed at the end of this document. I closed the booklet. My hands were sweating. Max whined softly from his dog bed across the room. The scratching sound began again, more insistent this time. I should have walked away. I should have called someone, told a friend, anything. But when desperation collides with curiosity, reason dies quickly. At midnight, I put on my jacket, grabbed the rule booklet, and headed for the door. The scratching followed me all the way out. The night air felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside. The distant hum of cicadas was drowned out by the pulse in my ears. My breath fogged slightly despite the summer warmth, and Max barked once from inside as if trying to pull me back. The road to Black Pine Storage twisted through narrow stretches of forest, the canopy of pines arcing above like skeletal fingers. My headlights cut tunnels of light through the darkness, and every now and then, reflective eyes of nocturnal animals flashed from the roads. By the time I reached the facility, the digital clock on my dashboard read 12:17 IE. The facility loomed ahead like a black monolith against the moonlit sky. The main gate was already open, almost as if anticipating my arrival. As my car crawled past the gate, the instructions from the survival booklet ran on loop in my mind. 2 vehicles will follow you. And there they were. 2 black SUVs emerged smoothly from either side of the entrance road, headlights flickering on in perfect sync. They followed closely, their engines whisper quiet as if gliding. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, every nerve screaming to look behind me to confirm what my peripheral vision was catching. The faint silhouettes of figures sitting still in both front seats. Don't look back. I kept my eyes fixed forward, knuckles whitening. My stomach twisted as sweat collected under my shirt. The warehouse office came into view, its porch light blinking steadily, like some eerie lighthouse guiding me toward temporary safety. I pulled into the designated space and shifted into park. The 2 black SUVs rolled to a stop several feet behind me, their headlights still illuminating my rear bumper. For a moment, nothing moved. The rule book had been very clear. If you see someone exit the vehicle on the right, run. I stared at the office door ahead of me, counting silently in my head, trying to will my pulse to slow. My peripheral vision caught a movement, soft, deliberate. The right side SUV's passenger door cracked open. No. My breath hitched as a pale, elongated leg stepped out, followed by a second. The figure emerging was too tall, far taller than any human should be. Its skin gleamed faintly under the pale moonlight, smooth and featureless, like polished bone. I didn't wait for more. Adrenaline surged as I flung my door open and bolted toward the office. My feet slapped against the concrete, breath ragged, heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, I heard a hollow, scraping sound, long limbs dragging across the ground as it pursued me. The door wasn't far. My shoulder slammed into it as I grabbed the knob, twisting frantically and throwing my weight forward. The door gave way and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut with a deafening bang. My shaking fingers found the deadbolt and latched it firmly. For several seconds, I just stood there, back pressed against the door, eyes wide, trying to process what had just happened. The thing outside made no sound, but the oppressive sense of its presence seeped through the walls like smoke. The emergency number. The rule book said to call it. I fumbled through my pocket, pulling out my cell phone. The number was scribbled at the back of the booklet, taped crudely onto the page. I dialed. It rang once before a calm female voice answered. There was no greeting, just a whispering, almost mechanical tone. "Survive a line, state your ID." My voice cracked. "Jason Miller. I just started tonight." There was a brief pause, as if she were reading something on the other end. "You encountered a violation of Rule 1, correct?" "Yes. What the hell was that thing? It's still out there." My voice rose, tinged with panic. "You were followed by one of the wardens," she said plainly. "They are not to be engaged or acknowledged. You are secure inside for now. Remain calm. This isn't some hazing bullshit. What are you people running here?" "Your safety depends on your compliance, Mr. Miller," she replied, the edge of finality in her voice unmistakable. "Do not attempt to leave the facility until your shift is ended. Proceed to the security office. Turn on all lights as you move." Before I could respond, the call cut off. I stood there, hand gripping the phone, the buzzing silence in my ear louder than any scream. Turning on the lights, right. I had read that rule. The office was dim, lit only by the flickering glow from a single desk lamp. I flipped the overhead switches, bathing the room in harsh fluorescent light. Somehow it made things worse, like exposing the shadows rather than chasing them away. My eyes darted to the internal map taped to the wall. Security office was further in, past 2 connecting hallways. I took a deep breath and moved forward. The corridors of black pine storage were eerily quiet. Rows of towering shelves stretched into the dark like cathedral aisles, filled with sealed crates and industrial containers whose contents I couldn't, and didn't want to, imagine. Each step echoed unnaturally. The building groaned with the weight of years, as though the warehouse itself was breathing. The occasional buzzing of failing fluorescent lights broke the silence. I reached the security office without incident. A reinforced door with a tiny glass panel allowed me to peer inside. The room was small but densely packed. Monitors, filing cabinets, and a single metal desk bolted to the floor. A thick layer of dust coated everything except the chair, which looked recently used. I stepped inside and immediately flipped on the monitors. Camera feeds blinked to life across 9 different angles of the facility. Most showed only static, but one in particular drew my attention. Camera 3. A little girl stood at the far end of one of the aisles. Small frame, pale nightgown, bare feet, clutching a ragged stuffed bear. Her head was tilted slightly, staring directly into the camera with wide, glassy eyes. I froze. The rulebook's voice echoed inside my head again. If you see the girl on camera 3, turn the feed off and on 5 times consecutively. My hand trembled as I hovered over the control panel. The girl remained perfectly still, her unnatural smile widening just a fraction, as if aware of my hesitation. Click, off, click, on, click, off, click, on, click, off. Each time the screen returned, her smile seemed to warp further, stretching into something grotesque. On the fifth cycle, she vanished entirely. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the chair behind me. My breath came in short gasps. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 1:00 a.m. This was only the beginning. The pounding stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I remained seated in the security office, my back pressed tightly against the cold metal filing cabinet. My breaths came short and ragged, my fingers clenching the armrests of the bolted chair, as though letting go might invite whatever lurked beyond the walls to burst inside. The cameras flickered, static dancing briefly across several screens. Camera 3 remained dark after the girl vanished. The other feeds were quiet. Rows of crates and towering shelving units standing still beneath the humming fluorescent lights, as if nothing had ever happened. I glanced down at the rulebook lying on the desk beside me, its corners already worn from my nervous hands flipping through it. The words blurred slightly, my vision still shaky from the adrenaline surge. Rule 3 was next. At exactly 1:30 a.m., return to the security office regardless of current activity. You will see a girl appear on camera 3. Toggle the feed off and on 5 times until she disappears. I had done it, and yet she was still here. Not physically, but somewhere. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly toward 1:33 a.m. A strange calm washed over me. Artificial, brittle. My mind tried to rationalize everything as some elaborate prank, but my gut knew better. The way her smile stretched unnaturally, the flicker in her empty eyes, it wasn't something a person could fake. A soft tapping sound cut through the silence. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. The sound was distant but deliberate. I leaned forward, staring at the grainy live feeds. Camera 6 showed one of the far storage aisles. Nothing moved. Camera 7 captured the stairwell leading to the sublevel. Empty. Camera 9 sputtered momentarily but stabilized. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from outside the office. I stood slowly, my legs stiff and weak beneath me, and approached the door. Through the narrow glass pane, the warehouse floor stretched out, illuminated under buzzing ceiling lights. The tapping sounded closer now, as if coming from the far side of the wall, almost directly behind the security room. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, jolting me. I yanked it out with shaking hands. Unknown caller. For a moment I hesitated, then I answered. A wave of static filled my ear, followed by ragged breathing. Heavy, labored, almost gasping, as if someone was running but couldn't stop to catch their breath. Jason, the voice rasped. My blood ran cold. It was my brother's voice. Jason, he repeated, barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and raw. Who is this? I demanded, my voice cracking. You left me, the voice groaned, the words distorted by static. Why did you leave me? My chest tightened. My brother, my real brother, had been dead for 5 years. Lung failure. I had sat by his hospital bed, watched his chest rise and fall until it stopped. I'd buried him myself. This couldn't be him. This isn't funny, I barked, rage overtaking my fear for a brief second. Stop it! The line went dead. The screen returned to my home screen. The contact listed only as Brothera, a name I hadn't used since I'd deleted his number after the funeral. Too painful to keep seeing it there. The tapping returned, this time harder, sharper. I spun around. From the corner of my eye, something darted past the thin glass window of the office. A blur of pale movement, fast and jerky, like broken film skipping frames. Max, my dog. I thought about him suddenly, as if the warehouse had reached deep into my mind to pull at my most vulnerable memories. No more distractions. I had to survive this shift. The rule book. Follow the rules. I gripped the booklet tighter as I exited the security office. Every instinct screamed at me not to leave, but I couldn't remain trapped there forever. The next part of my shift required patrol. The hallways yawned out before me, vast and dark like endless canyons. My flashlight's beam cut through the gloom, bouncing off the metal shelves, casting warped shadows along the walls. Every step I took echoed too loudly in the still air, making me feel exposed. Rule 4 hovered in my mind like a threat. At 2:30 a.m., you will hear knocking from one of the main doors. Approach quickly and knock back 3 times. The knocking will cease. The clock read 1:47 a.m. Time was crawling. Every minute felt like an hour. I turned down another aisle, the crates towering on either side like silent witnesses. My nerves were on fire. Any sudden sound made my heart lurch painfully. Another camera hung from the ceiling above me, its red light blinking rhythmically. I thought of camera 3 and the girl's twisted smile again, felt bile rise in my throat. Somewhere behind me, a soft shuffle echoed. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through empty air. Nothing. Was it my mind playing tricks, or was something following me through these endless corridors? Ahead, a crate sat partially open. Odd, since every container I'd passed before had been sealed tight. My curiosity overrode my caution. I approached slowly, shining the light inside. Claw marks. Deep gouges had been raked along the interior wooden walls of the crate, as though something or someone had tried desperately to escape from inside. Splinters jutted outward like jagged teeth. I backed away. Whatever was going on here, this wasn't a prank. I checked the time again. 2:04 a.m. Still too early. I needed to keep moving. The sound of knocking returned. Not tapping, but now a deeper, heavier thudding, echoing faintly through the warehouse like distant drums. It was coming. I wasn't ready. The knocking grew louder as I made my way deeper into the warehouse, now reverberating through the metal beams like distant thunder. Each hollow boom sent a pulse of dread up my spine, growing heavier with every step I took. The rule book never explained why I had to knock back, only that I must. I gripped the booklet tighter in my hand, as if its paper-thin pages could somehow shield me from what waited ahead. The words "do not delay" from Rule 4 rang in my head like an alarm bell. The warehouse seemed endless now, aisles stretching like veins, and every turn revealing more towering shelves filled with crates that watched me like silent jurors. The knocking continued, steady and deliberate, coming from somewhere beyond the far wall of loading bays. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating the floor beneath my feet. 2:28 a.m. Almost time. I picked up my pace, my legs protesting with every hurried step, heart hammering against my ribs like an animal trapped in its cage. My breath quickened as I neared the main loading doors, where the knocking was now so loud it was rattling the steel panels. The warehouse door loomed ahead, a massive metal slab framed in industrial rivets. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something that made my stomach drop. A faint indent forming where the repeated blows struck, as if the door itself was being bent inward. Something was on the other side. I froze just a few feet away, instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, but the rule was clear. Knock 3 times, delay could mean death. I took a breath so sharp it stung my throat, raised my trembling fist and knocked. Once. The pounding from the other side immediately halted for a moment, like a beast pausing mid-charge to listen. Twice. A shudder passed through the steel beneath my hand, like something enormous had shifted its weight against the door. 3 times, then silence. The heavy air returned as if the warehouse itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. My body sagged with the release of tension, my forehead resting briefly against the cold steel. I didn't realize I'd been crying until the tears hit the floor beneath me. My vision blurred with exhaustion, but relief was short-lived. A new sound replaced the knocking. Click. It came from behind me. I spun around instantly, raising my flashlight in a frantic sweep. The beam illuminated row after row of tightly packed crates. Nothing moved. The warehouse was silent again. Yet my skin crawled, as if unseen eyes were fixed on me. The walkie-talkie clipped to my belt crackled to life, making me jump. "Jason?" The voice was distorted, feminine, but off, like the words were being stretched through a filter that was just slightly wrong. I snatched the device from my belt. "Who is this?" I demanded. Static answered for several seconds before the voice returned, softer this time. "You shouldn't have looked." "What? Looked where?" The line went dead. A sudden draft of cold air swept through the warehouse, like fingers dragging across the back of my neck. The hairs on my arms rose. I turned, half expecting something to be there. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. Another call. Unknown number. I hesitated. I should have let it ring, but some stupid part of me hoped it was the emergency line checking on me. I answered. The breathing was back. Heavy. Desperate. "Jason," the voice wheezed again. My brother's voice. I almost dropped the phone. My knees buckled slightly as my back hit one of the steel support beams behind me for balance. I told you, stop this," I shouted into the receiver, but my voice barely sounded like my own. "You left me," the voice rasped. "You forgot." Tears welled again, but this time out of rage. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. My brother was dead. He was dead and buried, and whatever this was, it was using him. "Leave me alone," I screamed. The line cut instantly. The echo of my own voice bounced off the warehouse walls like some cruel mockery of my desperation. The fluorescent light above me flickered once, then again. My flashlight sputtered in sync, the battery indicator dropping suddenly to red despite being fully charged when I began my shift. The warehouse lights dimmed, casting elongated shadows that writhed unnaturally across the floor as if they were alive. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned back toward the security office, desperate to get back to somewhere lit, somewhere contained. As I stumbled into a full sprint, the building itself seemed to grow tighter, the walls closing in. Aisles that were wide open minutes ago now narrowing uncomfortably. The temperature dropped with every step, my breath fogging visibly. And then, more knocking. But this time not from the loading dock. No. This time it came from above, directly above me. I froze in place. My mind screamed the rule at me, "Do not look up." I clamped my gaze downward, focusing on the concrete beneath my feet. My peripheral vision pulsed as faint movement, something black and twitching, shifted on the ceiling far above. My entire body trembled, sweat rolling down my back despite the cold. A sticky, wet droplet landed on my cheek. I couldn't stop myself. My head tilted upward, just slightly, just enough. Two glowing red eyes blinked open in the darkness above. The thing hanging from the ceiling was huge, its limbs contorted, spider-like, gripping the steel rafters. It made no noise, but its eyes followed me, unblinking, intelligent. I forced my gaze back down, clenched my fists, and ran. The echo of my own footsteps sounded like gunshots against the warehouse floor, masking the faint skittering above me as the creature crawled, matching my pace. I burst back through the security office door, slamming it behind me. My chest heaved as I collapsed into the chair, drenched in sweat, ears ringing from the rush of blood through my head. The cameras flickered again. Camera 3 switched on by itself. The little girl was back, smiling, her face even more distorted now, jaw slack and eyes too wide for her head. I wasn't safe. Not even here. The clock on the wall struck 3. O'clock I.M. And I still had 3 more hours to survive. The pounding in my chest hadn't slowed, even after I locked myself inside the security office again. The heavy steel door felt thin now, a fragile membrane between me and whatever hunted out there. The clock's second hand ticked steadily, indifferent to the terror unfolding around me. 3:02 I.M. I tried to steady my breathing. The rulebook lay open on the desk beside me, its pages worn and smudged. The pages were starting to fray at the edges from how many times I had flipped through them tonight. The next rule loomed in my mind like a curse I hadn't yet triggered. I replayed everything, the knocking, the eyes above me, the voice that wasn't my brother. This wasn't some elaborate prank. This was something old, something deeply wrong. The radio on the desk crackled suddenly, making me jump. I stared at it, waiting for another distorted voice or some unnatural whisper, but there was only static. Then the cameras flickered again. Camera 3 switched on by itself. The girl was there once more. She stood exactly where she had earlier, in that long aisle of crates, her tiny frame motionless except for the way her head tilted ever so slightly to one side. She clutched the same ragged stuffed bear to her chest, her eyes wide and black like endless pits. But this time, her smile was wider, unnatural. Her lips stretched far too much, revealing gums where teeth should have been. I swallowed hard, remembering the rule. Turned the camera off and on 5 times. But something about this felt different. The air in the room shifted, growing thicker. The lights above me buzzed with sharp bursts of static electricity. My finger hovered over the switch. Click. Off. Click. On. Her smile widened further. Click. Off. Click. On. Her head tilted farther, bones audibly cracking through the speaker. Click. Off. I paused for a heartbeat before turning it back on the 5th time. Click. On. The screen went dark. I exhaled shakily, leaning back in my chair. My skin prickled. My mind screamed that this was escalating, that each time I completed one of their rules, the consequences pressed in closer. The phone rang again. This time the display read, "Brother." My blood froze. I should have ignored it, but curiosity and dread worked together like twin parasites in my head. I answered. At first it was the same labored breathing, then the voice rasped, broken and wheezing. "Jason, please, help me." Tears burned behind my eyes. I squeezed them shut as if that would make it stop. "You're not him," I whispered. "You left me. You left me to die," the voice sobbed. But there was something wrong beneath the words, like multiple voices layered under each other, trying to imitate sorrow but twisting it into mockery. I couldn't listen anymore. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the desk. The lights flickered again. A low rumbling sound echoed faintly from somewhere deep beneath the building, as though something massive was shifting far underground. My stomach churned as the air grew colder, heavier. The rulebook didn't say anything about this. I reached for the intercom button on the desk, trying desperately to call the emergency line I had been given earlier, but the speaker only emitted harsh static. Then, another sound. A knock. Not at the warehouse doors this time, not from above. It came from inside the office. I spun toward the metal cabinet behind me. 3 soft knocks, deliberate and measured, tapped against the thin cabinet door. My legs refused to move. I stared, frozen, unable to speak. Slowly, almost gently, the door to the cabinet creaked open by itself, revealing nothing but the empty steel shelves inside. But the smell that spilled out was revolting. Trot and mildew, like wet earth mixed with old blood. A whisper escaped from the shadows inside, barely audible. "Jason." I stumbled back, my body slamming against the desk, knocking the rulebook to the floor. The whisper faded into silence, leaving only the buzzing of the overhead lights. I dropped to my knees, my chest heaving, sweat pouring down my back. My mind spun as I tried to anchor myself to reality, but reality no longer seemed interested in cooperating. Then the rulebook caught my eye again, lying open to a page I hadn't noticed before. A handwritten note, scrawled hastily in the margin. "They know when you break the rules, but they want you to fail. The rules aren't to protect you, they're to contain it." A fresh wave of dread washed over me. My head shot up at the sudden sound of soft footsteps echoing in the hallway outside the office. The rhythm was wrong. Light, deliberate, almost playful. The girl. I reached for my flashlight and slowly crept toward the office door, peeking through the small glass pane. There she was. The little girl stood at the far end of the corridor, half shrouded in shadow, her head tilted again, the stuffed bear dangling from her hand like a broken puppet. Her bare feet left faint, wet footprints on the concrete as she took a small step forward. "Will you help me find my mommy?" she asked softly, her voice carrying an inhuman echo that bounced unnaturally against the walls. The rulebook's words flashed through my mind. Respond exactly. Not right now, sweetheart. I'll help you later. I licked my dry lips and whispered the phrase aloud, forcing my voice to stay steady. Not right now, sweetheart. I'll help you later. For a moment she didn't move. Her head twitched abruptly to one side, bones cracking audibly. Then her smile dropped and she vanished instantly, as though sucked out of existence. The silence returned, but it was heavier than before. I collapsed against the doorframe, barely able to hold myself upright. The clock on the wall read 3:27 a.m., 3 minutes until the next rule. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep playing their game. I forced myself off the floor, legs trembling beneath me as though my bones had forgotten how to carry my weight. The office felt smaller now, suffocating, like the walls were inching closer every time I blinked. The digital clock above the monitors flicked to 2:29. I am 1 minute. The next rule, the knocking. I clutched the rulebook again, my thumb instinctively running over the crease where the paper had started to tear from constant use. Rule 5 had been burned into my mind. At 2:30 a.m., you will hear knocking from one of the warehouse's main access doors. Proceed quickly to the source and knock back 3 times. The knocking will cease. The knocking always started exactly on time, and right now I was already behind. The distant sound came first. A low, dull boom that echoed through the skeletal halls of the warehouse, vibrating through my shoes. Another knock followed, louder, hungrier, as though whoever or whatever was on the other side knew I was listening. Boom, boom. I didn't hesitate, I couldn't. My legs carried me out of the office in a panic sprint, flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the rows of towering shelves and scattered crates. Every echo in this place sounded like another set of footsteps, mocking my own rhythm as if something just out of view followed in perfect unison. The knocking grew more frenzied, as though whoever or whatever was waiting was growing impatient. My heart pounded in my ears as I navigated the maze of storage lanes, weaving between walls of towering wooden crates and metal containers. Another sharp knock sent a fine layer of dust floating from the beams overhead. I rounded the final aisle and froze. The door. It was massive, a reinforced steel barrier that belonged more on a military compound than a warehouse. The panel shuddered under the assault of whatever hammered against it, the metal already dented inward like soft clay. I didn't let myself think. My body moved automatically, carrying me toward the door like a marionette driven purely by the rules. I raised my fist. Once, the pounding from outside paused. Twice, the metal groaned beneath my knuckles like it might buckle entirely. 3 times, silence. The change was immediate. The vibrating stopped, the door held, but the absence of sound was worse. It was as if the warehouse had swallowed the noise, sucking it into some deeper, invisible stomach where other horrors were quietly digesting. I backed away slowly, my breath sharp in my throat. Then came the whisper, not from behind the door, from behind me. Jason. The voice was too close, the same raspy mockery of my brother's voice that haunted the phone calls. This time, though, it was right here, directly in my ear. I spun around, flashlight flaring wildly. Nothing. The aisle was empty, but the air was wrong, thicker, colder. My skin tingled as though electricity charged the space around me. The lights overhead flickered violently, buzzing like angry hornets. And then they failed altogether, plunging me into near total darkness. Only my flashlight remained, a thin, desperate beam cutting through an endless, writhing void. Jason! You never left! The voice was everywhere now, not loud, but intimate, surrounding me, crawling beneath my skin. You belong here. Stop it. I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking. You're not real! Don't you remember? It hissed. Something brushed past my leg. Something cold and smooth. I stumbled back, crashing into a crate that rocked precariously above me. The whole structure groaned under its own weight, wooden beams creaking as though threatening to collapse. My flashlight darted wildly in every direction, but all it illuminated were more crates, stacked higher than I could see. A sudden pressure gripped my chest, a tightness not entirely physical, like invisible hands wrapping around my rib cage. My breaths came in short, panicked gasps. The rulebook fell from my pocket, sliding across the dusty floor. As I scrambled to grab it, my light caught movement at the edge of the beam. The girl. She was closer now, her head tilted even further, her neck bending at an unnatural angle, as though the vertebrae inside had been unspooled like thread. The stuffed bear dragged across the concrete behind her, one of its buttoned eyes missing entirely, leaving an empty, dark socket that seemed to match her own hollow stare. "Will you help me find my mommy?" she whispered again, voice like shattered glass being pushed through a narrow pipe. My brain screamed at me to repeat the phrase exactly as before, but panic tightened my throat. I stumbled through the words. "Not now, sweetie. I'll help you later." Her smile froze, twitched. The air shifted sharply, as though the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Her body convulsed once, and then her form shuddered and stretched, like something beneath her skin was trying to crawl out. "You broke the rule," she whispered. The thing inside her erupted. Her small frame ballooned outward. Splitting apart as thick, sinewy limbs burst forth. The creature that unfolded was monstrous, part human, part animal, its long, twisted horns scraping against the metal beams above, its jaw unhinged in a wide, gaping grin that was no longer even remotely human. I ran. Adrenaline pushed through my muscles like liquid fire, my injuries screaming in protest. My feet slipped across the smooth concrete, but momentum carried me forward as I bolted between aisles, barely missing crashing into crates as the towering beast pursued behind. Its guttural breath filled the air. The warehouse was alive with noise again, crashing, howling. The sharp screech of claws against steel as the creature clawed at support beams while gaining ground. A deafening slam shook the floor behind me, the beast colliding into a row of shelving that collapsed like dominoes, sending debris raining in all directions. I risked a glance back. Its red eyes locked onto me. My legs screamed in protest, but I forced them onward, sprinting toward the faint glow of the office door, the only safe space I knew. The distance closed rapidly. 10 feet, 5, I lunged. My shoulders smashed against the door, twisting the handle with every ounce of strength left. The door swung open, and I hurled myself inside, slamming it shut behind me and locking it just as the beast collided with the other side. The entire frame rattled from the impact, but it held. I collapsed to the floor, chest heaving, heart racing, as the creature let out one last bone-chilling howl before retreating into the shadows. The warehouse fell silent again. The clock read 3:33 a.m., and for the first time since the shift started, I realized I had broken a rule. The office door rattled faintly behind me, the vibrations slowly fading into the oppressive silence. My chest heaved as I pressed my back into the cold steel, trying desperately to force air into my burning lungs. My legs ached, threatening to buckle at any moment. I had broken a rule, and yet I was still alive. The warehouse felt different now, like I had shifted into some darker, deeper layer of this nightmare. The rulebook lay on the floor where it had fallen during the chaos, its pages splayed open as if mocking me. The words no longer felt like instructions. They were traps, tests, or worse, bait. I crawled toward the desk, my palm sliding across the cold tile. My fingers closed around the booklet. My eyes scanned it, searching for something, anything, that might tell me what breaking a rule meant. But there was nothing. No warnings, no consequences listed. Only the same hollow words repeated like a ritual. Failure to comply may result in severe consequences. Severe consequences. That was it. That was all they'd ever given me. The room was spinning slightly, and my vision blurred as the adrenaline finally ebbed. My shoulder throbbed where I had crashed into the door, and the sharp ache in my ribs hinted at bruises. or worse. The clock ticked past 3:35 a.m. 3 more hours. I stood shakily and staggered toward the small bathroom attached to the office. The flickering fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed weakly as I turned it on. My reflection stared back at me, gaunt, pale, wide-eyed. My hair clung to my forehead with sweat, and my lips were dry and cracked. Dark circles pooled beneath my eyes like bruises, and then, behind me, just for a second, I thought I saw movement, a pale shape in the reflection. I spun around. Nothing. The bathroom door was still closed, the space empty but for me. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady myself. The icy sting offered a brief moment of clarity. As I shut off the faucet, I noticed something else, a faint humming, low and rhythmic, as if coming from deep within the walls themselves. I stepped back into the main office, ears straining to follow the source. It wasn't the fluorescent lights. They had gone completely silent. This was deeper, almost like a vibration traveling through the bones of the building. I pressed my hand to the floor. It was warm. That was impossible. The warehouse had always been freezing, but now it pulsed with heat, like something below was awakening. And then the radio crackled again, only static at first. Then the voice. Her voice returned. "You've gone too far now, Jason." It was calm, gentle, even, but behind it something seethed, a chorus of whispers overlapping each other in rapid succession, like a crowd murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. "You weren't supposed to break the rules," she said softly. I grabbed the radio, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and terror. "What do you want from me?" Silence. Then, "To remember." The radio died with a sharp pop of static. I dropped it, letting it clatter against the floor. Remember what? I didn't have long to ponder the question. A loud mechanical groan echoed from deep within the warehouse. Somewhere far below the floor, the humming intensified. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and the rulebook, stepping cautiously out into the warehouse once more. The air was thicker now, humid, almost suffocating. A faint mist curled along the ground as if the warehouse was breathing. My boots splashed through shallow puddles forming across the concrete, their origin unknown. The humming led me deeper, beyond the areas I had patrolled earlier in my shift, past the known rows of crates and forklifts, into an older section where the lighting grew weaker and the walls changed. Here, the concrete gave way to older brick and rusted metal piping that snaked along the ceilings. The temperature dropped sharply again, despite the pulsing heat beneath my feet. The faint glow of my flashlight landed on a set of heavy steel double doors at the end of the hall, their surface marked with years of corrosion. Painted across the metal in faded red letters were the words, "Authorized, personal only." The padlock sealing the doors was already broken, hanging uselessly from the latch. Something, or someone, had opened this long ago. I hesitated, but the humming continued to pull at me, like an invisible current drawing me forward. My hand trembled as I pushed one of the heavy doors open, the hinges protesting loudly. The air inside was damp and rank, like earth that had never seen sunlight. Stairs. A narrow stairwell spiraled downward into pitch-black nothingness, lit only by the weak beam of my flashlight. Rust and mold coated the walls, and ancient stains colored the concrete steps in patterns that looked almost like symbols. Sigils burned into the ground by forgotten ritual. The further I descended, the stronger the vibration became, buzzing against my feet like some distant machinery turning beneath the earth. Halfway down, I spotted something that made my breath catch. Photographs. Hundreds of them. They lined the wall, pinned carelessly into the crumbling brick with rusted nails and broken staples. Faces stared back at me. Men, women, children, all in black and white, their eyes hollow, their smiles stiff and unnatural. Many of the photographs were stained, faded by time. But near the center, one photo stood out. Newer, untouched by decay. It was me, A younger version of myself, no older than 7 or 8, standing in front of what looked like a medical gurney. My face was pale, my expression vacant. My hands were gripping something. A small dirty teddy bear. The same bear the girl had been carrying. My stomach lurched as I stumbled back against the wall. No, I had never been here before. Had I? The buzzing beneath my feet grew stronger. The vibration traveled up my legs, into my chest, as though the very ground was reacting to my recognition. You were always part of it, the whisper came again, but this time not from a speaker or a phone, from inside my own head. The stairwell ended in a large chamber, its walls lined with rusted machinery and strange medical equipment half swallowed by the earth. At the far end stood a circular platform, its center engraved with symbols that pulsed faintly with an amber glow. The humming originated from there. At the edge of the platform lay something else, a journal. I approached it slowly, every fiber of my being screaming to turn around, to leave, to run. But my hand reached out and lifted the book. The cover was cracked leather. The first page bore a name written in looping cursive, Dr. Kendrick, and beneath it, in a language I didn't recognize, were symbols that made my vision swim and my skin crawl. I was no longer certain if this was real anymore, but the journal felt warm in my hand, like something alive, waiting. The journal felt heavier the longer I held it, like it was absorbing the warmth from my skin, like it recognized me. My fingers trembled as I flipped open the pages. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. The first entry was dated over 20 years ago. The subject has been successfully admitted. The ceremony will proceed once all conditions align. I swallowed hard. The ink beneath the words had bled into the fragile paper over time, but the meaning was clear enough. I turned the pages slowly, skimming through detailed notes. Diagrams of circles and symbols I couldn't decipher. Charts labeled Phase 1, isolation, and Phase 2, suppression. And then I saw my name. Patient 217, Jason Miller. The world around me tilted for a moment. My breath hitched in my throat. I read it again, unable to process the reality printed in front of me, my name, in his handwriting. I hadn't come here for this. This wasn't my life. I wasn't supposed to be part of any of this, but as I kept reading, the fragments began piecing themselves together like jagged shards of glass. Subject displays high compatibility, resistance noted during early sessions, additional sedation required, ritual incomplete due to interference, containment protocols initiated, memory partitioning successful, relocation ordered, new guardians assigned. I stumbled backward, clutching the journal like a shield, my vision blurred, my head spinning. Every instinct screamed that this couldn't be real, that it was some sick fabrication, but the pieces fit too well. The memory loss, the recurring nightmares, the way my life never made sense after my brother's death. They didn't just bring me here for this job. I was always here. The vibration beneath my feet intensified, humming like a heartbeat. The symbols etched into the chamber floor began to pulse brighter, as if responding to my realization. You remember now, the voice whispered again, except this time it wasn't coming from the walls or from my head. It was standing behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam slicing through the shadows. A man stood near the far wall, his figure partially obscured by the flickering light. He wore a stained white coat that had long since yellowed. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes sunken into hollow sockets like someone who hadn't slept for years. Dr. Kendrick, I croaked. The corners of his mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. You're stronger than I anticipated, Jason. The others failed long before reaching this point. His voice was calm, eerily patient. My legs refused to move. The others? He stepped forward, his feet barely making a sound against the concrete. You were one of many, but your connection to the vessel is unique. You were chosen, you see. The binding was never complete, but now you're finally ready. What binding? What the hell did you do to me? My voice cracked, rage and terror swirling together. He tilted his head, studying me like a curious experiment. "We preserved you, saved you from yourself. You were broken, Jason, but you were useful. You still are." I backed away, feeling the heat intensify as the glowing symbols on the floor pulsed like breathing lungs beneath us. My skin prickled with a sensation I couldn't explain, as if invisible threads were wrapping around my body, tethering me to the platform. "I never agreed to this," I whispered. "You did," Kendrick said softly. "You just don't remember. That's the beauty of partitioning. We keep what's useful, discard what's not." Behind him, the walls of the chamber shifted, almost like they were melting, revealing embedded shapes beneath the crumbling brick. Skeletal figures, dozens of them, half fused into the walls, their hollow eye sockets staring in every direction. The air grew denser with every breath, filling my lungs like syrup. The platform at the center began to vibrate, violently now, resonating through my bones. Strange symbols on the floor rearranged themselves, shifting like liquid stone into a new formation. "You've already begun the final phase," Kendrick said. "You crossing the threshold, breaking the rule, activated the ritual's conclusion. The warden's chase was simply the test." He reached toward me with one bony hand, his fingers unnaturally long. "Don't fight it, Jason. This is your purpose." I stumbled back against one of the rusted machines, the journal slipping from my grasp and landing open at my feet. My eyes darted to the exposed page. "If subject achieves full awareness, secondary breach may occur. Collapse of boundary imminent." Secondary breach, collapse of boundary. I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded worse than anything I'd faced tonight. "No," I said through clenched teeth. "I'm not finishing your ritual." Kendrick's eyes narrowed, but the smile remained frozen. "You don't have a choice." The floor beneath me cracked with a sudden violent tremor. The symbols burned brighter, casting deep shadows across the chamber. A high-pitched wail erupted from the platform, otherworldly, unrelenting. My ears rang under its force. From the shadows, the creature emerged. The girl, no longer a girl, crawled forward, her human shell discarded entirely. Twisted limbs extended unnaturally, her skeletal frame elongated. Goat-like horns spiraling from her head as she slithered toward me with terrifying grace. Her eyes locked onto mine, twin crimson orbs glowing with hunger. "You broke the rule," she whispered with a voice that layered dozens of voices underneath, both human and not. I backed away in a blind panic, my back slamming into the cold wall. The room spun wildly as the creature advanced, Kendrick standing behind her like a conductor orchestrating his grand finale. "You are the final seal," he said, "and now you will release us." The symbols flared one last time, and then everything shattered. The walls screamed as the chamber tore open in a blinding eruption of light and sound. I was weightless, falling into a void that had no end, no direction. Only voices, screaming, laughing, chanting my name, and then darkness. When I woke, there was no sound, no light, only weight pressing against my chest, as if something heavy sat on top of me, though nothing was there. My eyes fluttered open to complete darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was alive or still falling into that bottomless void. The air was thick and stale, tinged with rot. Slowly, I became aware of my body again. My limbs ached as I pushed myself up from the cold floor. The chamber was gone. The stairs were gone. I was somewhere else entirely. My flashlight was still in my hand, miraculously intact. I flicked it on, the thin beam cutting through the suffocating dark. I was in a corridor, narrow, brick-lined, claustrophobic. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping brown liquid onto the damp concrete beneath me. The humming I'd followed before was still present, but quieter now, deeper, like something was slumbering beneath my feet. The journal was gone, so was Kendrick, the creature, everything. It was as if the entire sublevel had collapsed and rearranged itself into a new labyrinth. As I stumbled forward, each step echoed unnaturally far, bouncing endlessly down unseen passages. The air grew colder the deeper I went, though sweat clung to my skin like a second layer. My mind was spinning. None of this was possible, and yet it was happening. The rules had brought me here, but the rules were no longer guiding me. At the end of the narrow corridor, I saw a faint red glow bleeding through a half-open door. The humming grew stronger as I approached, now pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, bare concrete walls lined with old filing cabinets and decaying shelves. A single desk sat in the center, beneath a naked bulb that flickered erratically, its red glow seeping from a cracked glass covering. The source of the humming was here, vibrating through the metal fixtures. What caught my attention first, though, was the wall directly behind the desk. Photographs. Hundreds of them pinned haphazardly across every inch of the wall. Some were old, black and white. Others newer, color, high resolution. But they all had one thing in common. They were all children. Different ages, different faces, but similar vacant expressions. Dead eyes, blank stares. Some held teddy bears, others gripped small wooden crosses or sat in metal chairs beneath harsh lighting. At the center of the collage was another photograph. It was me. I couldn't have been older than 8. Pale, frail, my eyes were hollow, my mouth slack. The same stuffed bear dangled from my small hand, the one that girl thing carried upstairs. My legs weakened beneath me, and I stumbled forward, pressing my palm against the desk for support. How? The question no longer made sense. There was no how anymore, only was. I scanned the wall desperately, my mind racing through fractured images, memories I had dismissed for years. The hospital, the screaming, men in white coats, my parents arguing, crying, disappearing behind locked doors. A place I was told I imagined, but it was all real. This place, this warehouse, wasn't a warehouse at all. It was where they brought us, where they broke us, and where they tried to bind something into us. A nearby filing cabinet caught my eye. Its top drawer sat slightly open, the metal warped with rust. I pulled it wide with shaking hands. Files, dozens of them, neatly labeled. Patient 204, Patient 205, Patient 2 and 6. I flipped through them rapidly, my breath quickening. Patient 216, Patient 217, Jason Miller. I froze. The file was thin. I yanked it free and opened it atop the desk. Inside were clinical notes, photographs, medical charts. My name was listed at the top of every page. Subject: exhibits high resilience to early conditioning. Ritual phase incomplete. Psychological partition stable under suppression protocols. Sibling terminated due to non-compliance. My stomach lurched violently and bile burned my throat. Parental termination authorized. I gripped the edges of the file so hard my knuckles whitened. They killed them. They killed my family. All of them. I stumbled backward from the desk, the weight of it crashing down on me all at once. My entire life, every memory, every unanswered question. It was all fabrication. They'd erased everything and rebuilt me to serve this ritual. And Kendrick? He wasn't alone. He was just one of many. I turned to leave, but my legs locked as I caught sight of something even worse. A second door stood on the far side of the room, its steel frame glowing faintly, as if illuminated from within. Of the door, carved directly into the concrete, were words that chilled my blood. The vessel Awig's complexion. The humming was louder here, almost unbearable now. A deep, resonant frequency that vibrated through my entire skeleton. I didn't want to open that door, but I knew I had to. The lock had already been disengaged. My hand reached out unwillingly, gripping the handle, my palm slick with sweat. The door swung open with a slow metallic groan. And there it was, the chamber, the real chamber. Massive, cavernous, far larger than the ritual space I had descended into before. The walls curved upward into darkness, and at the center stood a colossal stone platform, engraved with the same spiraling symbols that seemed to pulse in time with the humming. Chains hung from the ceiling like the limbs of a giant spider. And on the platform, something waited, a shape. Humanoid, but twisted, incomplete. Its flesh shimmered like liquid shadow, constantly shifting, unable to settle into a fixed form. Limbs stretched and retracted, mouths opened and closed across its torso, whispering in unison. It was me, or what was supposed to become me. The vessel. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It turned its head toward me slowly, as if sensing my arrival, our arrival. "Welcome home, Jason," it whispered, not in a voice but inside my skull, my own voice speaking back to me. And then it smiled. The smile was wrong. It wasn't just on its face, if it even had a face. It stretched across the entirety of its unstable form, dozens of mouths bending and twisting across its surface, each grinning wider than human anatomy allowed. The eyes that blinked open across its shifting torso were mine, familiar but dead. I couldn't breathe. The humming that filled the chamber grew sharper, higher, now resonating inside my skull like glass vibrating on the edge of shattering. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced them to hold. The thing took a step forward. Its movement wasn't natural, fluid, like ink spreading through water. Its body rippling as if gravity meant nothing here. Each time it moved, the ground beneath it pulsed with that amber glow, as if the symbols carved into the stone were feeding it. "You see it now," it whispered again inside my head, overlapping voices. Mine, Kendrick's, the girls, my brothers, all blending into one chorus of familiarity and horror. "You were made for this." I shook my head violently. "No," I whispered, voice cracking. "No, I was never meant for this." It didn't stop. "You were broken. We fixed you. We erased the fractures you could not carry. This is where you belong, Jason." "You're not me," I screamed, backing away toward the doorway, though every nerve in my body screamed to turn and run. The creature halted, its many eyes narrowing with something like amusement. "You broke the rules, Jason. You disobeyed the structure that was designed to protect you, but your failure was necessary." The chamber pulsed again, stronger this time. Dust fell from the unseen ceiling high above. Chains creaked and swayed like pendulums. "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice barely audible against the vibrating air. "The vessel requires balance," it answered, its mouths moving without sound while the words echoed directly into my mind. "The rules are not meant to protect you. They are meant to stabilize the gate, to give you time to accept, time to complete." The realization hit me like a hammer. The rules, the entire structure of my survival tonight, hadn't been a test to help me escape. They were preparing me, softening me, conditioning me. Every rule was a piece of the ritual. My chest burned as panic turned to fury. My hands trembled, but I clenched them into fists. "You failed before. That's why I survived. That's why I don't remember." "Yes," it whispered, "you resisted. You slipped free before the binding could take hold fully. But now you've returned willingly. Your mind has reopened the seal. The fracture is closed." I shook my head again, taking another shaky step back. "I didn't choose any of this." "But you came back," it countered softly. "You answered the ad. You walked through the gate. You followed the rules." I staggered against the door frame. My vision swam under the oppressive humming, and then, from somewhere deep in the recesses of my fractured memory, another voice cut through. My mother, her words faint but clear. "If they find you again, never look back, Jason. Never listen. Never stay." I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath hitching. I was doing exactly what they wanted, listening. The creature moved again, faster now, its limbs stretching, mouth splitting open into rows of needle-sharp teeth. The walls pulsed. "You're ready," it whispered. "Accept us." The floor beneath my feet began to vibrate so violently I could barely remain upright. The glow from the engraved platform intensified to a blinding amber, like molten glass pooling beneath us. "No!" I screamed, forcing my body to move. I turned and sprinted back through the steel door, slamming it shut behind me. The hum didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, angrier. The air behind the door howled like a vacuum, pulling at my back. I ran blindly down the narrow corridors, back through the maze of filing cabinets and photographs, each image a brutal reminder of how many others they had broken before me. As I reached the far end of the hall, the humming finally shifted. No longer steady but stuttering, erratic, fracturing. The system was breaking. The binding was destabilizing. I burst through another steel doorway and into an unfamiliar maintenance tunnel, this one far older than anything above. The walls were coated in thick moisture, pipes hissing as steam vented into the narrow space. My flashlight flickered desperately, its battery nearly dead. Behind me, distant shrieks echoed, inhuman howls bouncing down the length of the tunnel like some beast clawing after its prey. And layered beneath those howls was my own voice, whispering from the mouth of the thing I'd just fled. "Jason, don't run. Jason, come back." The tunnel narrowed the further I ran, forcing me to duck and scrape my shoulders against the dripping concrete. My breathing turned ragged, my vision blurred, but I couldn't stop. Ahead, the tunnel split, two identical paths, a left, a right. My chest heaved as I stared at both, paralyzed for the briefest second. And then the humming shifted again. From the left corridor, it pulsed stronger. The binding was pulling me toward it, a trap. I veered right. The corridor tightened further, but I pressed forward until it finally opened into a small chamber, a maintenance outpost of some kind, old and abandoned. Tools rusted on the floor, broken lights dangled from the ceiling, but in the center stood an old maintenance hatch, an exit. The red emergency handle was still intact, dust coating its surface. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the hatch wheel and twisted. The gears screeched in protest but slowly turned. The heavy steel hatch unlocked with a sharp metallic thud, and I pushed it open into a blast of cold air. Moonlight. Night air. Outside. I pulled myself through the narrow opening, collapsing into wet grass, gasping like a man resurfacing after nearly drowning. The facility towered behind me like a monstrous monolith, its lights flickering wildly. The humming inside rose into a shriek that pierced the trees, and then sudden silence. Everything stopped. I stared at the building, my chest still heaving, waiting for the next sound, the next movement. But none came. Only the distant rustling of the forest greeted me. The nightmare had cracked, but not ended. Not yet. The silence was unbearable. Lying on the cold, wet ground outside the facility, I stared up at the moon as the night breathed around me, calm and indifferent. My chest still heaved with ragged gasps, but the adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold emptiness inside my ribs. I was alive, but barely. The humming was gone. The glow from inside black pine storage had vanished completely, as if the entire building had powered down. No more flickering lights, no more vibrating floors. Only that hollow silence that made my ears ring. I didn't know how long I lay there, unable to move. My mind spun through everything that had happened, through everything I had been forced to remember. The rituals, the rules, the vessel. Me. They hadn't wanted to kill me. They wanted me to complete something, to become something. But something went wrong. The rules weren't holding anymore. Finally, my limbs responded. I pulled myself to my feet slowly, every joint screaming in protest. My clothes were soaked, heavy with sweat and grime. The grass beneath me was slick, the scent of wet earth filling my nostrils as the early morning air cooled my skin. I glanced back at the warehouse. Black pine stood like a hollow corpse, the main building silhouetted against the faint hint of dawn creeping along the horizon. The structure looked smaller now, almost fragile, as though its power had drained the moment I escaped. But I knew better. This place wasn't empty. It was waiting. In the distance, I heard the faint crunch of tires against gravel. Headlights appeared at the far end of the private road leading into the property. 2 sets, SUVs, the same black vehicles that had followed me when I first arrived. My blood froze, but I couldn't run. My body wouldn't let me. The SUVs stopped just beyond the tree line. Doors opened, but no one stepped out immediately. The stillness stretched long enough that my skin crawled. Then they appeared, 3 figures. They were not like the others, not like Kendrick. These men wore tailored black suits, their movements calm and precise, no panic, no urgency. They were deliberate, clinical. The one in front, taller than the others, approached slowly, hands folded behind his back. His face was smooth, ageless in a way that unsettled me, a kind of artificial symmetry that made him feel manufactured. I backed away instinctively, but he raised a hand in a gesture that almost resembled politeness. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "You've had quite a night." I said nothing. My throat was too dry, my mind too scattered. "You've done well to survive this far," he continued, glancing briefly over his shoulder at the facility. "Few ever make it beyond the initial stages." "Who are you?" My voice cracked as it finally broke free. He smiled softly, though his eyes remained hollow. "You may call me Director Hale." The 2 men behind him stood motionless, as if they were waiting for a command that hadn't yet been given. "What do you want?" I asked, my fists clenching, though there was nothing left in me to fight. Hale took another step forward. "We're not here to harm you, Jason. In fact, we're here because you're very important to us." I shook my head. "I'm done. I want nothing to do with this place, or any of you." "I believe you," he replied calmly. "But unfortunately, your existence complicates matters now. You've disrupted an operation that's been in motion for decades. The vessel was unstable, yes, but your survival makes you unstable as well. You want to put me back in there, don't you?" I spat. "No," Hale said softly. "No, not again. The vessel has failed. The cycle is broken. For now." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "But broken things are dangerous, unpredictable." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, like a pager but older, bulkier. A faint red light blinked at its center. "I have authorization to resolve this before it spreads," he said, almost apologetically. The red light blinked again. "You can't contain this," I said through gritted teeth. "You never could." Hale studied me for a moment, then offered a faint smile that chilled my blood. "We've contained far worse." The click of a safety being disengaged caught my ear. The 2 men behind him raised sidearms, silencers attached. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the uneven earth, but before they could fire, the ground trembled. A low rumble rolled beneath us, faint at first, then building rapidly. Hale glanced down, his polished calm finally faltering. "What is this?" he whispered. The grass rippled like waves. The building behind us groaned as its frame shifted, metal grinding and snapping deep within its foundation. And then came the voice, not from the facility, from the air itself. "You should not have come back." The trees bent under an unseen force, as though the entire forest had inhaled sharply. Hale stepped back now, his facade slipping into something closer to fear. The ground split open behind him with a sharp crack, and a pulse of amber light erupted upward, blinding. A roar, inhuman, furious, erupted from beneath as chains of energy burst through the earth like glowing tendrils, lashing toward the 3 men. The 2 guards screamed as the tendrils wrapped around them, pulling them violently into the widening chasm. Their bodies twisted unnaturally before disappearing into the void. Hale stumbled, his face pale now. No, this wasn't supposed to happen." He turned to run. But the tendrils were faster. They struck him mid-step, lifting him off the ground as he convulsed. His screams echoed across the forest, rising into an unnatural pitch as his body was ripped apart in a single gruesome motion. Blood rained onto the grass like a fine mist. And then, silence. The earth sealed itself again, the light dimming as quickly as it had come. Only my breathing remained. The sun was beginning to rise now, casting faint golden beams through the trees, making the aftermath feel almost peaceful, like none of it had ever happened. But I knew better. Whatever was buried beneath black pine wasn't finished. It had simply changed. And it had protected me. For now. The light shifted as dawn fully broke, casting long streaks of gold across the wet grass where I stood, breathless. For the first time in hours, no, in years, I felt something unfamiliar. Emptiness. Not relief, not safety, just absence. The agents were gone. The SUVs remained abandoned, their doors still open, blood splattered along the driver's side windows like some brutal punctuation mark. The earth beneath them had already sealed itself, as though nothing had happened. Nature swallowing its sins. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty ground where Director Hale and his men had been devoured. It felt distant, disconnected, like I was watching someone else witness it all. The wind carried a faint, low hum again, but softer this time, like breathing beneath the soil, waiting. I finally forced myself to move. My body ached, every joint stiff from exhaustion and cold. I stumbled toward the abandoned SUVs, my shoes squelching through the damp soil. Inside the first vehicle, the dashboard screen flickered faintly, displaying strange streams of code I couldn't decipher. Lines of data flashing and resetting like some corrupted system trying to reboot itself. Black Pine had been more than a warehouse, more than a ritual site. It had been a program, one that failed. Inside the glove compartment, I found several sealed folders, thin but marked with that same insignia I had seen inside. A black circle wrapped in barbed wire, no official government seal, no familiar agency acronym. The folder marked Post-Vessel Contingency made my skin crawl. Inside were surveillance photos of me, recent ones. My apartment, my grocery store, my dog Max playing in the park. They had been watching me long before I ever answered that job posting. I slammed the folders shut, bile rising in my throat. I was never free, not even after escaping once. They had waited for the timing to be right, for the fracture in my mind to weaken, for the vessel to call again. And I had walked right into their trap. The rules, the tests, the job, they weren't recruiting me, they were retrieving me. A dull buzzing sound cut through my spiral of thoughts. The radio mounted to the SUV's console activated on its own, emitting a faint burst of static before a voice, mechanical and sterile, crackled through. Protocol breach detected. Secondary stabilization incomplete. Field operatives compromised. Standby for reclamation. A long pause. Subject 2017 remains active. Observation reinstated. My blood ran cold. Observation reinstated. Even after this, they weren't done. Someone, or something, was still watching. Somewhere, behind layers of organizations and rituals and machines, there were still eyes on me. I staggered back from the SUV and looked one final time at Black Pine. The facility sat in silence, but it wasn't over. It was never over. The humming beneath my feet pulsed faintly again, as though responding to my thoughts. A low rhythm, and patient. I turned away, forcing my feet to carry me toward the tree line. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to move, to put distance between myself and this place. Between myself and whatever still breathed beneath the ground. The sun rose higher behind me, casting long shadows through the dense forest as I limped further into the trees. But as I crossed into the woods, a strange sensation rippled through me, a distant vibration. Not in my ears, but in my chest. Familiar, like the pull I had felt within the chamber. Something wasn't letting me go. You carry it now. The whisper came not from behind me, nor from some unseen pursuer. It came from within. I froze. The humming didn't remain buried beneath Black Pine. It was inside me, the vessel. incomplete but present. The binding hadn't fully failed. It had only "You belong to us," the voice whispered faintly inside my skull. I clenched my jaw, forcing the rising panic back down my throat. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept walking, one step after another. I wasn't going to let it win, not yet. The world around me slowly returned to life as I made my way deeper into the forest. Birds chirping, insects humming, the distant rush of a creek somewhere nearby. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the night I'd endured, but under it all, I could feel it. The silent thread stretching between me and the place I had left behind. The program was broken, the facility destroyed, the agents gone. But the ritual lived on, and I was its carrier now. I didn't know how far their reach extended, how many others were still out there, but I knew this much: they would come again, and next time, there might not be rules to guide me. Several weeks have passed since that night. I've stayed on the move, never sleeping in the same place twice. Motel to motel, cash payments, no records, no paper trail. But the dreams are getting worse. Every night I hear the humming again. The same amber light flickers behind my eyelids. The same voice whispers promises of completion. Sometimes I wake up with blood beneath my fingernails. Sometimes I hear my brother's voice. And sometimes, God help me, I hear myself. I don't know how long I have before they find me again, before the thing inside me fully awakens, before the vessel completes what was started. I've begun recording everything, every detail, every memory, every rule. If you're hearing this, reading this, or finding this somewhere after I'm gone, don't trust anyone. Don't answer any job offers. And if you ever find yourself inside Black Pine, don't break the rules. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. The Rules of Black Pine was never just about survival. It was about what lies beneath the surface, the things we try to forget, and the price of opening doors that were never meant to be touched. In the shadows of abandoned buildings, within the echoes of old rituals, and buried deep inside fractured minds. Sometimes, horror doesn't end when the night is over. Sometimes, it follows you. I want to thank every one of you who joined this journey into the unknown, who dared to step into the darkness with Jason, and who understand that the scariest monsters are not always the ones we see, but the ones we carry inside. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more horror narratives, chilling mysteries, and tales that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Your support keeps these stories alive and sometimes brings new ones into existence.